My first near-death experience happened in April of 2000. I was in a hospital visiting my sister-in-law. She had just had a baby that day, and I had a massive seizure, and I had never had a seizure before. And all of a sudden, all I know is I'm opening my eyes and I'm laying with my head in my grandma's lap. And my grandma is looking down at me. She is smiling. And I remember feeling this overwhelming bliss and love. And as I'm looking at my grandma, I look up next to her and I notice that there's this 12-foot angel standing next to her. I went to look for her feather wings, and they were actually made of light. And they were iridescent, they were translucent. And as I was looking at her, I was just literally drawn into her energy. It was like being pulled into her.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Michelle Clare with us on the show today. Michelle's a certified medium, angel intuitive, energy healer, and a spiritual coach. In addition, she's had 3 near-death experiences. In particular, I'm eager to hear Michelle's take on soul plans and her work with spirits who transitioned by suicide. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now, let's go chat with Michelle. Michelle, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted you could join us today.
Hi, Julie. I am so honored to be here with you.
Well, the honor's all mine, girl.
Hello.
You have experienced 3 NDEs, my girl. Holy Moses. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, right? As if one's not enough.
Goodness.
Yeah, and one of the things I love to say about my NDEs is that every one of them was very different. So you would think if you were going back to this heavenly realm, each time you'd kind of have the Groundhog's Day experience, right? Where it'd be like the same thing again and again. But they weren't. They were all so unique and really beautiful awakenings for me on my path. Although I was somebody who came back with physical trauma from each of them. And my first near death experience happened in April of 2000. And at that point in time, I was in a hospital visiting my sister in law. She had just had a baby that day. I was talking to her RN, who was my friend from high school, out in the hallway. And I had a massive seizure, and I had never had a seizure before. And all of a sudden, all I know is I'm opening my eyes and I'm laying with my head in my grandma's lap. And my grandma is looking down at me. She is smiling. She is the youngest, healthiest version of her that I can remember. And I remember feeling this overwhelming bliss and love and almost a little bit of like there was no time. I felt I didn't know if I had been laying there a second or an hour. And I remember just feeling so much peace. And at that point in time, my life was it was good. I was newly married, no kids yet, but I wasn't expecting to have this experience. So as I'm looking at my grandma, I look up next to her and I notice that there's this 12-foot angel standing next to her. And I had been raised Catholic, so I believed in angels and saints and, all of that anyway, but I had no idea how massive they actually were. In my mind, they were probably human size. And so as I looked at her, I remember the first thing I thought was, oh, I want to see her feather wings. So I went to look for her feather wings, and they were actually made of light. And they were iridescent, they were translucent, they were kind of like the aurora borealis. They had movement to them, and they were almost seeming to span eternity. I really never saw the end where they completely trailed off. And as I was looking at her, I was just literally drawn into her energy. It was like being pulled into her. And at the same time, I remember thinking, what is your name? And she answered me and she said, my name's Madeline. And she answered me in her head. And at that point in time, I knew nothing about telepathic communication.
So Madeline was the angel, or was your grandmother's spirit?
She was the angel.
The angel spirit. Okay.
Mhm. And I remember being surprised that she heard what I was thinking because I didn't know anything about telepathic communication. And at that point in time, she then said to me, I'm your guardian angel and I've been with you your whole life. And I just remember this feeling of awe and love and peace coming over me. And so was really just laying in this bliss for I don't know how long. But the next thing I know, I hear someone yelling, code, code, code. And I am shoved back into my body. And I really felt shoved. It felt like I hopped out of a 2-story window or something. Like I got dropped right back in. My body felt heavy. It felt dense. My arm felt like it weighed 500 pounds. I went from feeling truly light as a feather to like a cement brick. Um, and I remember, being back in my body then. And because I was in the hospital and had already quit breathing, they were calling the code team. For me, what happened then, they admitted me to the hospital. They ran all sorts of tests and they never found out what caused the seizure. And I had never had another one since. But what that was for me in hindsight was really some of the lessons that I got to start experiencing. I did not know it was a near death experience because I didn't know that term. I just knew I had had this profound, vivid experience. And at that point in time, I realized, my gosh, my grandma knew to be there. Like I started to realize heaven knows when we're coming, right? Because my grandma, who had passed a couple years before, and my guardian angel were waiting for me. And it really woke me up to the angelic realm in a different way, where all of a sudden I had a personal relationship with it instead of a relationship that was taught to me, if that makes sense. And and that was very life-changing. So it took me a couple weeks to actually tell anyone about it because I didn't know how to explain this because it was so vivid. And I tried to tell my mom, and my mom, she was an RN, and she believed me. She just was trying to understand how this could happen because she didn't know anything about near-death experiences either, and, but after that, at that point in time, I just kinda kept it to myself, and I moved forward because I didn't have a community or anyone who would really understand it, and I truly didn't even understand it myself. I just knew it was profound, it was life-changing, and I had n no container to put it in.
Mhm. I see angels too, especially when somebody's dying and they're big, like you're talking about, they're huge. And I was surprised by that too, because I thought they were gonna be like people size. But yeah, I there's some validation for you. I see the same thing. Raised Catholic too. And I don't know that it's because of the stained glass windows and the statuary and the paintings that we've seen. I believe it's what you and I are perceiving to be the angels, but they're massive with these massive wings. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
You're the only person I've ever talked to that said that I've
really?
heard say that. Yeah, the angels are just massive. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're like, 7 feet plus tall.
Yes, they're huge. They are truly huge, and I do feel like for me, I needed in that near death experience to actually be able to be in awe of her size because it would prepare me for things that would be coming later in my life that I would know when I say we all have a team of angels with us, that this is a power beyond our humanness that we can probably barely comprehend.
Well, and the fact that your angel told you that her name was Madeline,
Mhm.
I think is great. Again, that correlates with what my experience is too, Michelle, because early on when I started talking to angels, they'd give me these names that were like 15 letters, all consonants. And I'd say, how am I supposed to pronounce that? It's either a dead language or some
Right?
language from a galaxy far, far away, or who knows what. And so I said, "Can you guys just give me a name that is easy to pronounce, it's English, and people are gonna be able to relate to it?" And they started doing that. And Madeline is not necessarily a name that I would equate with a heavenly being.
Right.
It's kind of our regular name, but it's the way that they communicate with us. Is that Madeline's real name? Maybe yes, maybe no. That's what Madeline wants you to call it,
Right.
'cause I don't think spirits have a gender, and it gives you the opportunity to have a relationship based on your frame of reference. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. And I will tell my clients all the time, if you don't have a name for your angel or your life guide, give them one. They're like a new puppy. They're like, I don't care what you call me. Name me something so that we know we're communicating.
Exactly. I had a little girl recently. I was in Ireland a couple months ago, and my girlfriend's granddaughter, who's 5, her name's Willow, said to me, "What's my angel's name?" And I told her, and then she said, "Does she have a middle name?" And so I asked her angel, and the angel said, "If she wants me to."
Oh,
And then gave us a name. So I'd never been asked that question before. Have you?
no, I haven't, but I love that. They're like,
Yeah.
yes, what would you love? And I can have a last name too. Go ahead, throw one on there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So you came back and there were no medical repercussions.
I had a concussion, but they had no idea, what had caused the seizure. I never had one before, never since. And so I kind of got back to going about my daily life and, just being newly married and moving on. And so then, about in 2006, May of 2006, I have my second near death experience. And at that point in time, I had 3 little kids. So I had a 5-year old, a 2.5-year old, and my son was 6 weeks old. So I had had quite a few complications with him, and, after I actually had birthed him, I was in the hospital the majority of 4 out of 6 weeks with infections. They were running IVs, they were doing all sorts of stuff. And so what happened at that point, they said, let's do a DNC. You should be healed enough that we can do a DNC, and that's a procedure that clears out the uterus for people who don't know and just kind of cleans it out. And they said, so at that point in time, once that's done, it's outpatient, 45 minutes, you'll be fine, you'll go home. I wanted the easy button because it did not feel easy. And so I was like, okay, yeah, let's do this. Plus, they were running out of options for me besides literally going in and removing the uterus at that point in time. So I went ahead and said I would do that. And I remember the night before, I just had a pit in my stomach. I had this brick in there. I thought I shouldn't do this. I need to cancel this. But I wanted to be done being at the hospital. I was ready to be at home with my babies. And so I went in and I asked the doctor about it, and he said it'll be fine, 45-minute procedure. Asked the anesthesiologist. He basically said the same thing. And I had had anesthesia before, and whenever I've had it, it's just a blank space. It's not a dream, it's not a memory, it's just nothing, a blank space. So I remember counting backwards for the anesthesiologist, and the next thing I know, I look over and my beautiful 102-pound white German Shepherd, who had transitioned a couple years before, walked into the operating room, laid her head on my gurney, because she would always come in at night and lay her head on my bed to check on me, laid her head on my gurney, and we were gone. We were on this phenomenal beach. And I was looking at her, and she was almost glowing from the inside out. She looked like the most healthy, vibrant 2-year-old shepherd you had ever seen. And we were telepathically communicating. I knew she was happy to be there with me. And here we are on this beach that is phenomenal. Once again, there's no time. Every cell, every molecule, and every plant, and every um, piece of air and every drop of water is radiating light and love from the inside out. And there are colors there that we don't have here. There are smells. I even would like to say emotions that are more intense and more clean, almost is the right word for it, than we have here. And so she and I were on this beautiful beach, and we are just running. We are just going for this run. And I am looking at her, and I'm feeling the sand beneath my feet. And it doesn't feel like wet beach sand. It feels like I'm running on clouds, and I'm just enjoying this. The temperature, absolutely perfect. Everything was perfect as you would expect it to be. And then at some point, I start to notice that in this space that I'm in, there's only each breath and each step. It was like there was nothing before and nothing after. So I absolutely was able to be in the most present tense I've ever been in my life in that. And as we were there, and I have no idea how long we were on this beach, I start to realize, gosh, we're not getting hot or tired or thirsty. And we've been running for a long time. And here's the funny thing about this near-death experience. I, human Michelle, I hate to run. Like, I tell my friends, "If you see me running, call 911." That is like an emergency. That is not me out for a jog, right? And yet here I am in this heavenly realm running and running on this beach with my amazing, beautiful dog. So the next thing that I know, I can feel my son, and my son at that point in time was at my house with my mom. He's 6 weeks old, and he was calling to me because he knew my soul was getting ready to leave. And I remember going to him, and I remember saying to him, "I promise I'm not gonna leave you. I'll find a way to stay." And I didn't know what to do, so I started praying, and I started saying, "I need help. It's not my time. My kids still need me." And at that moment, I'm transported back into the operating room, and I see Jesus walk in. And Jesus walks in as my best friend, not as confess your sins or pray to me or yeah, it was literally he came in as my true best friend. I see the operating room light up in this beautiful golden white light, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in post-op, and my 45-minute procedure turned into a 3.5-hour emergency surgery because they had ruptured my uterus in multiple places and missed an artery by literally a millimeter.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. Wow. Wow. Operator error?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh my goodness. Wow. Ugh.
yes. So in that one, so now I come back from this NDE. Once again, I don't know that it's called a near-death experience. I just know I've had another extremely profound, life-changing, vivid experience that feels more real than this conversation you and I are having. And I come back and I have a lot of physical damage. It takes me about 4 months to recover to 80% of my ability to function. I have 3 little kids. I don't know what to do with this, but I know what has happened. And so I kind of also just put it on the back burner because I don't know how to process it. And I'm really in survival mode with trying to heal and trying to be a mom to 3 little kids and just get back to where I thought I needed to be.
Why do you think your white German Shepherd showed up? I had a white German Shepherd as a kid as well, which is pretty rare. They're pretty rare. Mine's name was Frosty, and we got her when I was in 2nd grade, and we put her down, the week that I graduated from college, so we had her a long time.
Wow. Oh my
And
goodness.
especially for big dogs like that, that's a long time. What was your white German Shepherd's name?
It was Tahoe.
Tahoe. So well, that's a great name too. Ours was Frosty. What why do you think it was the white German Shepherd that showed up in that NDE, the second one, versus like your grandmother again or your angel or what was it about you and your dog?
Well, there were a couple reasons for that, I believe. Number one, this was like my soul dog. I'm a dog person anyway. I've always had dogs, but once in a while, we get this dog that is so special that you want to call this dog like your soulmate, right? So she was kind of my soulmate in dog form. But to rewind a bit, when I was in first grade, one of my dogs had to be put to sleep, and I went to CCD or Sunday school. And my teacher said to me at that point in time, "Well, I hope you know your dog didn't go to heaven because they don't have souls." And I remember being crushed, right? I didn't ever own that or believe it. But so I felt like her coming in was a few things. One, she was there to let me know she was still with me. That yes, all dogs do go to heaven, right? And really also because she was there in a way to she was always so comforting. I always felt so safe with her that for that experience that I was having when my body was going through that level of trauma, it was just a beautiful, safe, happy space.
Yeah. The other thing is I've heard from several people who've experienced an NDE and also many, many spirits once they're in heaven and they've transitioned completely. They talk about the colors and that the colors are so amazing because they're unlike the colors they have the colors that we see, but there are so many more colors that we can't even imagine or envision because we don't have a frame of reference for them.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
100%,
Yeah.
100%.
Were they
That's
sparkly? Are they dull? Are they flat? Are they glossy? Are they all of the above?
The ones that I think they can be all of the above. The ones that I saw were so vibrant, and when I say sparkle, it tends to make us think of glitter, but it wasn't like that. It's like they're sparkling from the inside out. So it's as though even the colors themselves are alive.
Fabulous. Okay, so what about number 3? So it took you a while to recover. You obviously, I would imagine, had a hysterectomy since they perforated your uterine wall and all of that, and it took you a while to recover, and then tell us about number 3.
Okay, so number 3 happens for people who like numbers on 11/111. So I just, passed my 13-year anniversary with that. And what happened at that point in time, my kids, they were 5, 8, and 10. I was still married, and I had candle holders that were about 12 feet off the ground in my house. We had 14-foot ceilings. And so, once a month I'd have to change the batteries, and every night the candles would turn on and glow and just make it warm and cozy in there. And at this point in time, my older daughter was still at school in an after school program, and I had my 5 and 8-year-old at home with me. And I said to them, as soon as I climb up this ladder to put the candle back in, we're going to go get your sister. So I remember climbing up the ladder. This was something I had done 20 times probably. And as I get to the top, I can feel it start to shift. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to hurt because I knew it was going to go down. And in the moment that I said, "This is gonna hurt," I was literally ripped out of my body, not in a painful way, but in a very, very fast way, and I was turned around, facing my body in the ladder, suspended in the air like a freeze frame in a movie, and I was standing with these 3 people, and I didn't know these people, but they felt like dear friends or family, an Asian man, an Egyptian woman, and a Hawaiian man. And as I was standing there with them, once again, I felt this blissful, unconditional love surrounding me. I felt this timelessness coming in. And they said to me, "What do you want to do? Do you want to stay or do you want to go?" And I remember trying to understand how it felt like I had forever to decide what I wanted to do when I was literally looking at my body thinking, it's going to hit the floor in a second. How do I have forever to decide what I'm going to do? But nobody was rushing me. I had forever to decide. And as I was standing there looking at my body in the ladder in the air, I saw this other angel come in. And this angel was beautiful, different angel than Madeline, dressed in this deep, deep red and gold. And the moment I saw that angel, I said, "Oh, that angel is here to either take me home or shift something so that I could stay." I knew immediately why that angel was there. And as I was standing in that space, my attention was drawn to my younger 2 kids who were right there in the kitchen. And as I saw them, I realized that I needed to stay. And as I made that decision, I got downloaded with a lot of information, and it was, "Okay, but now you've gotta go back and you've gotta do your mediumship the way that you can do it. But we have amazing mediums in this world, but we all work differently. You've gotta go help people in the way that you can help them." They told me that my 25-year marriage would probably end in divorce, and they told me that there would be more trauma ahead. And I remember
Gee, thanks, guys.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Full disclosure, right? I remember being in this amazing heavenly realm. I remember them telling me, "Hey, you're not going back to all rainbows and unicorns." Like, I remember this. And I remember saying, "Okay, send me back." And so what happens is I end up falling off the ladder. I hit the back of my head on the corner of my granite island. So I had a 5.5-inch skull fracture that fractured from the base up to the top. I had a brain bleed, I lost my taste, my smell, my hearing, my equilibrium, but I literally survived the fall by 1/2 of an inch because that was how much I missed my brainstem by, and
God
that was the
heavens.
difference of what that angel moved my head. That was the difference of me staying or going, truly a 1/2 of an inch. And so what happens then is really it just continues on with the story. So at that point in time, my younger 2 kids who were 5 and 8 were at the house, and, my daughter calls 911, they get me to the hospital, I'm in the hospital for days, brain bleed, all of that stuff, it's traumatic brain injury, and, um, I get home, mid-November, and then we get through the holidays, and in January, my son, who was 5 years old, started to get very depressed because he had tried to call 911 when the accident happened and his call didn't go through. And he would say, "I didn't need to be there. I didn't do anything to help you." And we would say, "But Josh, you opened the door for the policeman. You helped, and there was nothing that we could really say that seemed to shift him out of this energy. And so, the end of January 2012, my grandfather, who passed away when I was 12 years old, literally manifested to me. I've never had spirit manifest in front of me before or since then, but I was in my kitchen. He manifested in front of me, and I said to him, "It has been so long since I've seen you." And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "I knew it would feel like that to you." And, then he started talking about my accident, and he started talking about my son, and he talked about how good he is with electronics, and then he said to me, "You need to get the 911 recording. There's something on there you should know." And he was gone. And so I was just in shock kind of because this was such an intense visit. So I went down and ordered it. It took a couple weeks to come in, and I got it and I started playing it, and I heard them say, 911, what's your emergency? And in his little broken voice, my son Josh says, "Sophie, what do I say?" And he laid the phone down. So his call had gone through. And for the next minute and a half, you can hear the operator trying to get their attention. You can hear them in the background talking. And they finally get to the point where my son says he's going to push the panic alarm button on the house. And my daughter says, "Hold on, let me try calling 911." She hangs up the phone and redials it, and her call goes through to a different operator.
The fact that your 5-year-old knew to call 911 and or hit the panic button on the alarm is remarkable in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good job, mom.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's almost as if I had a higher knowing that at some point they might
Yeah.
do that someday, right?
Yeah. Wow.
He comes home from
I
kindergarten.
have goosebumps.
I
Like,
know.
since you started talking about all this stuff, my whole body is going, "Bleh."
I
Yeah.
know.
So,
Um,
go ahead.
he came home from kindergarten and I literally said to him, I said, "Josh," I said, "your call went through. Help was coming." And I never played the CD because it was pretty traumatic for, listening to it in the background. But as I told him that, it was as though I lifted a 10,000-pound weight off this little 5-year-old boy's shoulders, and you could see his self-worth and pride come back into him, and I really, in that moment, truly understood the power of mediumship, and that my grandfather came through with a message that changed the trajectory of my son's life, one that I humanly didn't even know was available.
Well, and that even a 5-year-old would even be cognizant of, "My call didn't go through and mommy, you could have died," kind of a thing. I mean, most little children aren't even aware that something like that could happen, but thank God they were there with you and that they knew what to do. My goodness. And I'm thinking at this point, your husband's probably saying to himself, "Oh my God, did I just marry the woman with the worst luck in the world or what?" Goodness. Yeah. All right. So then what happened?
So then after that, it takes me a long time to physically recover from this type of injury. I still do craniosacral therapy for vertigo, and it's been 13 years. So, but I've regained a lot of my abilities back. So then what happens is I start getting messages for people, downloads of information. And so, like any good mom, I say, well, I better go see a counselor because I think I'm losing my mind. His spirit's coming in. And I'm getting messages from my husband who transitioned, my friend's husband who transitioned by suicide, and my friend from high school, and like all these loved ones start kind of knocking on my door, and I don't know how to control it. And as spirit would do, spirit led me to the right counselor who said, "Oh, Michelle, what a gift. Let's find you a mentor." Right. And so then I started mentoring with different people for quite a few years to really learn how to train it, to understand my communication with spirit and really hone in on it so that I could feel like I was giving accurate, valid information.
So you didn't communicate with spirit before, only in your NDEs is what I'm hearing. Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, I had mediumship abilities with my grandma and grandpa after they transitioned throughout my life. at those points, I would tell my mom what they were saying, and she'd say, "Well, that's what you think they would say if they were still here." So what I learned was to keep it to myself. So I did have mediumship abilities, but to me, it felt like it was just with my family. And I wouldn't have even used the term mediumship because I didn't know that word. It's just I knew we had a communication still. But after that third NDE, all of a sudden the floodgates opened.
Yeah. Well, and I was raised Catholic too, 12 years at Catholic schools. And I think the Catholics do a really good job, as do other religions and cultures, of letting us as little children understand that there really is something beyond this human life with the angels and the saints and the, Holy Spirit and stuff like that. Would you agree with that?
100%. That was one of the best parts about being raised Catholic for me is I always felt like I had a team of light beings waiting to help me, right? If you lose your dog, pray to Saint Francis. If you're traveling, pray to Saint Christopher. Like you're always feeling like you have a team.
Right. If you lost something, pray to St. Anthony.
Yes.
Tony, Tony, look around. Something's lost and must be found. My mother and my grandmothers used to say that prayer when they'd lose something.
No.
I can remember being teeny and hearing them saying that. So I
Right.
agree. Okay. So you started being able to communicate with spirit and with angels. Does it feel different when you're talking or you're communicating with an angel versus a spirit? Or does it feel the same? And how does the information come into you? How do you communicate with them?
Yeah. So, for me, I think about it as different stations or channels or frequencies. So it's kind of like I guide or direct it. So if somebody wants angel messages, we're going to channel 111. If you want to hear from your life guides, 112, grandma 103. It's kind of like guiding and directing it. It does have a little bit of a different vibration that I would say that I feel when I'm connecting with it. With the information or the loved ones in spirit, because we're kind of talking about in my readings, I love to give all of it. I love the mediumship, the angels, and the life guides because for me, I feel like that gives a whole picture. I love the mediumship because it's very healing, and I think somebody who has a hard time believing I'm even talking to grandma would have a really hard time on believing I'm talking to a life guide. So it just depends what the person's ready for. Right. But it does feel like it comes in on, I would say, different wavelengths or different frequencies. And for me, most of it, I do see and hear a little bit, but most of my information comes through as feelings. So what I will say to people is it's like looking at someone that you know really well and you know what they're going to say before they say it. The information is just right there. It's a it's a telepathic transmission.
Right, right. And do the angels and the spirit guides give you what's known as evidential information like a grandparent or another deceased loved one does? I find that the deceased loved ones will always come in with information that will make sense to their loved one who's still in human form, even if it doesn't make sense to me. And a lot of the time it doesn't, but it will make sense to them. Do you find the same thing with your deceased loved ones as well as the angels and spirit guides, or is it the loved ones primarily that just give the evidential information?
I feel like the angels and spirit guides do too, because they can talk to you on a soul level about your soul plan and what you were doing last week and why it didn't work. So I feel like they give evidence too. It's going to look a little different than our loved ones in spirit, but they know you inside and out better than any human can. So they're very good at giving evidence and clarity and understanding.
Do you find that the type of information that you receive from those 3 different entities differs? Like, is it the deceased loved ones will give more practical information and the angels and the spirit guides will give more esoteric or spiritual kind of information about the soul path or things like that?
I do find that. I find that, a lot of times the loved ones in spirit talk about their lifetime here with you and what that looked like. And maybe the challenges you had or the victories you shared, whatever those things are is what the loved ones talk about. But the angels and the life guides, they really know our soul's plan. And so they're looking at the bigger picture for us than even what our humanness is doing in the moment.
Yeah, I find the same thing. I had a gal this morning and we were talking with her granddad's spirit in heaven, and he was giving her driving advice. It was so cute. She was 27 and he'd been gone since she was 14, and he was talking to her about stop signs. And I said to her, "Do you encounter a bunch of stop signs? What's up with that?" And she said, "Yeah, I work on a campus and there's like 10 stop sign intersections that I have to go through every day to get to my office." And she said, kids, a lot of the time, the students aren't paying attention and they're rushing. And so it was interesting how all that came in, and I find that to be very common as well. I find also, and I'd love to hear your take on this, that when someone is talking to a deceased loved one, especially if it's the first time, first of all, it's very healing and comforting. But secondly, they expect or they're hoping that their deceased dad or granddad or whomever is going to give them some kind of big life advice. And I find that, like you, it comes more from the spirit guides and the angels than our deceased loved ones. Have you found the same thing?
Absolutely. When you're looking at that's why I love to include all of it in my readings, because when you're looking for the whole picture, we've gotta look at the whole picture, right? And so I feel like the angels and the life guides bring in, knowledge that, yeah, grandma and grandpa aren't sharing during the reading, but it's because they know your soul's plan. They know what you wanna accomplish while you're here.
Yeah. Why is it that the spirit guides, tell me about the spirit guides. Are they entities that were in human form at one point, and they have a life or lives that they've lived that correlate with what your client is going through at that moment in their lives, or has gone through or will go through? How do those relate?
Yeah, so for me, well, what I found out in my 3rd near death experience, those 3 people I was standing with were my life guides, and I actually know them all by name, but at the time, I just thought they were some really nice people, you know? For me, my understanding with the life guides or the spirit guides is this: they've had many incarnations on planet Earth, so they know how to navigate this terrain, right? You don't wanna come to planet Earth with a life guide who's never been here, because understand the ins and outs of it as much as one that has been here quite a few times. So they come in with this big understanding of how to navigate Earth. They remember our blueprint, so they are the ones holding the space for us to accomplish our missions and our lessons that we want to learn in this life. And with that, they're always the ones who are trying to keep us back on track, back on track. So I do believe they've had physical incarnations, but I believe across the board that souls can incarnate into different realms, different planets. I think if you had a bad life, that doesn't mean you're coming back as a cricket. I think if you decide you want to be a dolphin for 50 years in the ocean, source loves you and says, okay, go ahead. So I don't necessarily believe in a hierarchy of it.
What Talk to us about blueprint. Tell
Okay.
us about that, how that works. Who
Yeah.
who decides what our blueprint is? Is it a collaborative effort of a bunch of us in heaven with spirit guides and angels and others? Is it something that is already predetermined for us? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my understanding from spirit world about the blueprint is that about 60 to 70% of our life is already set up in this blueprint. So, with that being said, in heavenly realm, before we come into our body, we are deciding, hey, I want to play Michelle. It's like picking out video game characters. I'm going to pick blonde hair. I'm going to pick blue eyes. I'm going to pick this for my special power or whatever it is. Right. And so, we're kind of going through and we're picking out these things. We even pick out our DNA line. We know what we're being born into as far as this family might have ALS or cancer or whatever it is. So we choose these things. And then what we do is we are with our guides and angels, and we're actually kind of picking and choosing who can best help support us on this journey. And so it's all done from a place of love. So if it's not the right guide, they understand. Let's get the right guide. So what happens then is we
You can
do,
trade them in.
yeah, you trade them in. Like, hey, I'm going with option number 2 instead. But so we come to this understanding in spirit world. Now, it's also my understanding that sometimes they'll say, "Hey, that's like too much. You are wanting to take on too much in this life. You need to save some of that for next time." Right? So they kind of have an understanding of what our soul is capable of, and they have a clear understanding of what we're actually signing up for. And so then We are all, when we come into our human form, we are veiled, but there's not just one veil over planet Earth. We are individually veiled. And depending on the person, the veil is a different amount of thickness, right? So some people who are walking around will just say, somebody maybe who's an atheist, who's like, there's no God, nothing exists. Okay, that's fine. They just got a little bit of a thicker veil when they came in. Someone like you, Julie, it's like you have no veil. You've worked through it. It's disintegrated, you know? So it's not a universal veil over planet Earth. It's an individual veil over the soul and what the soul wants to see depending on their lifetime. So we have this blueprint. We come in, 60 to 70% of it is kind of already drawn out for us, but the other 30 to 40% of it is free will. So think of it this way. There could be a hallway that you're going to walk down. This hallway is set there, but you get to decide how you want to design it, what color you want to paint it, what pictures you want to hang. You get to decide if you want to walk down the hallway, dance down the hallway, crawl down the hallway. So there is still some free will within the structure, but some of the structure is already set.
What about exit points? There are a lot of people that say, okay, we have certain exit points where we can transition out of the human experience and just go back to spirit. What have you learned about that? Or have you?
Yeah. Well, so I feel like I had a few exit points myself. My understanding is we all do have other exit points. So when we're talking about soul plans, reincarnation, and exit points, what we really need to keep in mind first and foremost is that God, source, the divine, whatever the word is for the higher power, is truly about love and compassion. So none of us are forced to be here. We had free will as a soul to choose to come here, and we chose our plan. So that's kind of one thing to keep in mind because sometimes life feels like a punishment when it's not going well, but it's not. It's always about love and compassion. Exit points would also be allowed because that's about love and compassion. There are times when some souls get to a point that they cannot turn around from whatever it is. Maybe somebody's been battling drug addiction for 30 years or whatever this is. And it's that OD, which actually lets them go into peace or something along those lines. That would be an exit point that would be built in where if they said, when they were coming in, okay, and if I don't beat my addiction by 30 years in, then I'm going to put an exit point here so that I can gently go home to source.
Okay, so it's pre-planned.
They're not always they're most of them aren't taken. When we look around, we really only take one exit point on planet Earth. One. But there are options along the way that could be near miss car accidents, NDEs, on and on and on. Some of them we'll never even know about. You'll never even know there was an exit point there. It's kind of like walking through the hallway and not noticing the door there, and that's fine. But at some point, we will all take one exit point.
What about we hear about people, and certainly I've had many clients that have experienced this with a loved one at the end of their lives where they're coming in from all over the country to be with the mother before she passes, and she's on death's doorknob, or whatever that saying is. She's there. I mean, they think she's gonna pass any second, and she doesn't, and she hangs on, and she hangs on, and she hangs on. I have a story about that in my book where there was a woman who was dying, and she just was like, wouldn't go.
Right.
And she wanted all of her kids in the room with her when she died. And so they did. They gathered all the kids in the room and then she left. She exited stage left. So is that an exit point that has a long expiration date on it? Or what's going on there?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. It's one that was well, and also let's look at it this way. Maybe it didn't have a long expiration date. Maybe that was always the plan that she would leave with all of her children in the room. So she was just hanging on until they got to the point in the plan where it was okay to let go.
Yeah, because I've always heard we decide when we go, where we go, how we go, who's with us or not when we go, what the circumstances are that surround it. And what I'm hearing you say is that yes, that's true, and at the same time, we're utilizing an exit point where all of those variables, all of those different parameters are in place, and then we go ahead and take that exit point.
Yeah,
Am I
absolutely.
understanding that
You
correctly?
are. You are.
Yeah.
And in the same kind of tone, there are so many people that everyone is in the room and they wait till everyone leaves for just a second and they slip out the back door because that's how they wanted to go.
Yeah. My Meemaw did that. She
Yeah.
died a half an hour after I left her in the hospital, and she ate a full dinner, and she ate dessert, and she drank a whole cup of coffee with 2 Sweet and Low packets in it. And she died 6 weeks before she turned 100, and she didn't wanna be 100, she wanted part of 100, and so she checked out 6 weeks before she turned 100, was gonna turn 100, but, yeah, I thought she wanted to go to heaven with a full stomach, and she did. It was just so cute, so cute. What about when and I've heard this so many times from so many spirits about, we decide when we go, where we go, all of that. What about people who decide to transition by suicide?
Yeah. Well, so I'm not sure if you're aware, but my life partner transitioned from suicide last August. So in 2023. So I'd worked as a medium for many years before this happened, and then got to be someone who had to live through it. And so, what I would say about that is there are a couple different things. And one of the things with his leaving by suicide is that it absolutely drove me to dive into this further. What is the soul plan? Was this planned? Did I agree to this? And so I really found some more information on that from spirit world and my true searching. And what I have found is that suicide was not written in as the way he was going to leave this life, but it's a free will choice that we all have. Luckily, most of us are not going to take it. But really, spirit world, if we give them any opportunity to keep us here to succeed, they will intervene and they will do that in any way, shape, or form that they can. But sometimes what happens is that a soul has become so closed off for whatever reason that literally it's almost like there is no more light that can get in to save that soul from making that type of choice or decision. But if there is the slightest opening, there will be an intervention every time.
So it's not like it was that it's always necessarily premeditated. It's that it's been my experience in working with many families, and I'm so sorry about your partner and about, you having to go through that. My God, girl, when you get to heaven, you're gonna win like 15 gold medals, and you're gonna have a crown and, a Miss Universe sash and stuff like that. Good heavens. Jeez Louise. Everything you've been through. But it's been my experience too that the spirit who died by suicide will say, it was a split-second decision. It wasn't like when somebody wants to transition in a long illness and they're dealing with cancer or ALS or something like that. I would say the majority of the time, if not every time, I've spoken with a spirit who has died by suicide, they say, "It was a split-second decision, and I took it."
It absolutely was for him, and I can speak to a little bit to my situation with him. So, I knew he had had depression, and he had had it on and off at times, and there would be times where he would just turn off his phone and his computer and go to bed for 2 or 3 days, sleep through it, and then kinda come out okay again. And so at this point in time, I was actually out of town and I had texted with him that morning. He had gone to my house. He had fed my animals, watered my plants, waved to my neighbor as he pulled my trash can in the backyard. And then he went home and he took his life. And so I had even texted with him and he was sounding good and optimistic. And I got home that night and I hadn't heard from him. And I thought maybe he was with a client and I texted him again, nothing. The next day, called, everything, nothing, drove by his house. He had a daughter who was in her mid-20s that wasn't, ready to meet me or whatever, so I drove by, I saw his car and hers out front, so I figured he was just having one of those days, and I let it be that, and that night we had a party we were supposed to go to, and he didn't, show up, which I figured he wouldn't at that point in time. And so that night I went home, and I was getting ready for bed, and I actually felt him come in behind me. I could see exactly what he was wearing. He looked at me and he said, "You sure are beautiful." And my body started to collapse because I knew this was mediumship and I did not want it to be mediumship. And so I was able to make it over to my bed and lay down and just lose it. And I felt him lay behind me and he put his arm over me and he said, "I wanted to be the one to tell you." And that was how I found out that he had transitioned.
Wow. Wow. I'm so sorry. I was having this conversation with a nurse this morning who's a client, and she lost a child by suicide as well. And she said, I just don't understand why all these people with depression are put on antidepressant medication. And one of the side effects is suicide. She said, "What's up with that?" And I said, "Well, I'm not a pharmacologist, so I don't know, but I understand what you're saying." And she thinks that there's really a connection there with, because it seems to be there are more suicides now than ever before. And she said most of these people that are dying by suicide are on antidepressant medication. Do you have any thoughts about that?
So in Gary's case, he was not on medication. He always felt worse on it. And I think it's kind of a double-edged sword with that because there's probably a lot of people that help too. And if you think about it, yes, people who are transitioning by suicide are probably on antidepressants because they're depressed, and happy people aren't transitioning by suicide because they're finding a way to be happy, right? So there's kind of like a correlation already there. You're not going to be on antidepressants if you're not fighting depression, right? I don't know the biology or the physiology and all of that behind it. But I would just say this, that what I actually really think happens at the end of the day is a lot of this is chemical, but so much of it is our thought process. So much of it is us saying, "I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't make enough money. I'm not lovable. I'm not likable. I've been abused. I've been traumatized in ways that no one will understand." So much of this is actually the internal story that we are telling ourselves, and we have told it for so, so long that we believe it. And I think that is really a lot of what leads to these situations, just to the depression itself, even. We know this just by listening to music. A sad song comes on, everybody goes, "Oh," you go to a party, the music's upbeat, everybody's happy and talking, right? And so what we're feeding our mind and our hearts, it has to be every bit as important or more important than what we're putting in our body.
Yeah, because our thoughts create our reality. Yeah. So how are you coping with all of this? What kind of support do you have from your community of both humans, perhaps family and friends, and maybe even counselors and therapists, and also from the spirit world? How have they come together to support you during this journey with,
Yeah.
was his name Gary, you said?
Yeah,
With
uh-huh.
Gary, yeah. And did you end up meeting his daughter? Were you able to have a relationship with her and or go to some kind of funeral or memorial service or something for Gary?
Yeah, so what ended up happening actually is that 3 days later, I ended up meeting his ex-wife and his 2 daughters when I went to his place because they had stuff for me, and I knew going in there that this could go really good or really bad because I had never met any of them, and they opened the door, and I literally just said, "I love you guys, and I'm so sorry that we're all going through this," and just sobbed, and we actually sat there for 4 hours hugging and crying and talking, and it ended up being so beautiful. So his youngest daughter, I still have a relationship with her, and the other 2, we're good. We don't stay in communication as much, but, it ended up being a situation, and I could feel him when I was in that room with them, and I could feel there was that part of him that was always so worried we'd never get along, they'd never like me, right? The human story that we tell ourselves, and yet in this moment of trauma, it was like this sisterhood of broken hearts in this same room with his love there for all of us, and so it was really extraordinary and beautiful and the way that it should be, and so throughout the process, I've had amazing friends and family who have just stepped up beside me to help me get through this. I've done a lot of other things. I did a pre-life soul regression because I was like, I need to know, I need to understand. I probably didn't do the typical therapies that a lot of people do grieving, but in my soul regression, what I wanted to know was, did I sign up for this and why? Like everyone wants to know, why would I do this? And here's what I found. I found that so in my 25-year marriage, I had never felt loved the way that I had felt by Gary. And so my connection with him showed me a love that was possible that I never even could fathom existed before. And on his side of the agreement, he stayed longer for me to be able to feel that kind of love. And part of the agreement also included that if he was going to transition by suicide, because of who I am and the mediumship work and everything that I do, I could actually use that to help others who were grieving similar losses or to understand it in a way better than someone who does different work. And so there was a soul agreement where it wasn't that it was etched in stone, but it was me saying, "If you choose to do this, I will find a way to carry on."
Goodness. Wow. Phew, you're remarkable. Goodness. Goodness. When you are working with a family who has lost a loved one, it's been my experience that they wanna know why, and I tell them, well, their spirit relative says, "Give that up. It's never gonna make sense to us from our human perspective." But what I hear all the time is, "You'll get it once you get to heaven. It's all gonna be very clear." But but so often, especially at the beginning, people will say, "Well, why? Why did they choose this way? Why did they choose to die very suddenly in a car accident or of a massive heart attack in their bed or something along those lines without saying goodbye? Why did this happen? Why did you allow it? Why did you want it? What was going on?" And I find that their loved ones in heaven, they don't really explain much about that. They just say everything happened perfectly. It all unfolded perfectly, and their loved ones are going, "Perfectly? This is horrific. There's nothing perfect about this." And yet their loved ones' spirits in heaven are all saying, "No, this is all perfect. It's all unfolding perfectly. It did unfold perfectly, and you'll understand it when you get to heaven." Have you come across that as well?
Absolutely, I have, and I think that's part of our human condition. We wanna see the whole blueprint. "Wait, what did I write in here? Where's my eraser? I wanna rewrite this. Let me wipe that part out," right? And so, yes, I do think that, and that is that part where in this human form, we're not gonna know it all, we're not gonna comprehend it all, but when we get to that realm, we really will have an understanding of why things played out the way that they did, and we're gonna understand actually how much of this we've agreed to. And here's the thing about that. It's kind of interesting because I really truly know that I wrote my life plan. And so when I sit here going like, what is going on here? There's no one for me to blame except me because I know I wrote this, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. And it's a shock, I think, to most people. They're going, "I wouldn't choose this. This is crazy." Yeah.
Right, and I'm always like, "What the heck was I thinking?" You know? Um, but so I agree with you on that, like, and there's a bigger plan at play. Listen, we have to remember this in every aspect of our life, whether it is with the job we just lost, the loved one who's transitioned, the move that's coming up, who won presidency, whatever it is. Listen, humanity, you need to know there's a bigger plan at play, and my life plan and your life plan, we are feeding into the collective. So we're here for an individual soul reason. We are also here for a greater purpose, and there is a higher plan at play. So it's just when we start to realize that, that's when everything will be revealed to us from that heavenly realm, when we can see the layers of the plan, not just what our little, 3D individual Michelle is trying to see happen right now.
I think of it as we're looking at a situation with a magnifying glass, and we're looking at one little section of it instead of panning out and getting the whole movie, all the frames all together. from not just this life, but all of our lives. So there's always a bigger picture, and it always benefits us in some way, even if it feels awful at the time that we're going through that. Some people will say, well, that's a cop out. That doesn't make any sense. And I'll say, yeah, I know, but that's just what I've heard from spirit a bazillion times. We don't know what the blueprint was. We don't know what the past lives have been. We don't know exactly what our spirit came in to explore and experience in this life. And certainly your spirit wanted you to be really busy this round. Goodness. I know, let's change directions for a minute. I know that you have talked about shared death experiences. Please tell us what that is and what you've experienced, and how does that differ from a near death experience?
Right. So the shared death experience is actually much easier on me personally. So the shared death experience is when I am healthy, whole, I'm being Michelle, I have no trauma happening. And what is happening for me is I'm sharing in someone else's transition. So I have had three of them. The first one I had was with my second white German Shepherd, Maya. And she was had leukemia and was getting euthanized at our house, and I was in my pajamas on the floor crying, not trying to be a medium. I was being like a sad family member is what I was being, right? And the vet administered the anesthesia, and I heard my mom no, before I heard my mom say this, I felt her soul gently disconnect from her body. I'd never felt the soul
Your
just
dog?
yes.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the scene in Forrest Gump where there's the feather on the wind. It was just this gentle float of her feather soul disconnecting. And when I felt that, I heard my mom, who was in spirit, say, I have her now. And then about 30 seconds later, the vet said, she's gone. And so that was my first shared death experience where I actually got to feel her disconnect from her body. The second one was more intense. So this one just happened in January, and I was getting my hair done, and I was back under the dryer, and my lady comes back to get me, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, we have this guy out front who's passed out on the sidewalk. We had to call 911." So I'm walking up towards the front of the building, and as I'm walking up there, I hear fentanyl overdose. So by the time I get up there, the police are arriving, the ambulance is arriving, so there's nothing that I need to do. But I see him, I see them working on him, and all of a sudden, I feel his soul, like, hovering around me, hovering around me. So I start praying, I start calling in the angels, I start calling in the light for not just him, for everyone who's responding to this emergency, just really trying to hold that space. And so I go and I sit down in her chair again, and I can feel actually at that point, they were loading him it's like we are linked in. I can feel that they're loading him into the ambulance. She starts doing whatever she's doing. I'm absolutely in this space. Once again, still holding that space for light and angels and help. And the next thing I know, I can feel him coding in the ambulance, and I can feel them doing CPR on him. And then I feel his soul gently disconnect. And I know he transitioned. And then we were disconnected. And so that was my near death experience with him, or shared death experience. The third shared death experience I had was with my other dog that we just had to euthanize in July, and she was 14. We had had her forever. She was spunky, and so, same thing, we had the vet come to the house. I, was feeling her disconnect with that feather energy again. I felt my mom once again say, "I have her now." And so I thought, okay. So I was sitting about 15 minutes later at the kitchen table with my daughters, and it was around 3:34 in the afternoon. It was bright. I'm looking at the front door, and one of my daughters and I see this bright flash of light come in the door. And it would be as if it was nighttime and car lights, came in the door. That's how bright the flash was. And it was her, and she came in, and she went to one of our other dogs was laying in the spot that she always laid in, and she came in, and she was vivid and perky, and I just started channeling information from her, and she's like, "I'm here," I like the whole body wag energy, right? That's why I'm doing that. She's like, "I'm here to tell everybody I'm okay. I'm already running through heaven," and she went and she sat where our little dog was laying down. Our little dog sits up, doesn't move, is staring straight ahead, which I know she was looking at Daphne, which was our dog that just transitioned, as they had this communication. And then she went into my other room to talk to my other dog, and then she was gone. So those are the 3 shared death experiences that
Wonderful.
I've had, but it's just beautiful because it tells us that there is somebody to hold the space to understand. And we know people that have sat with their loved ones and maybe their loved ones transition and they just see the curtains move in the room and that's the soul leaving the body, all the way up to people who've reported seeing their loved one's life review. But the most common thing about all of these shared death experiences is that the person who is able bodied and healthy sitting there is left with a sense of peace that they hadn't known before.
Exactly. All right, couple questions as we're winding down here. A couple more questions. Number 1, how do you connect with spirit? What's your technique? Do you just turn it on and off? Do you have your abilities on all the time? Tell us about that. How do you
Yeah.
connect?
That's a great question, and it's probably one of the biggest questions I get asked, like, "Are you reading me right now?" I'm like, "No, I'm just trying to get groceries," you know? Um
What do you see around me? I'll get that a lot. What do you see? I'm like, I don't have my radar on. Yeah.
Exactly. So I thought I like to think of it all as like this radio, right? I turn the volume down when I'm not working. So if spirit, my guides, my angels really need my attention, they're gonna tap me on the shoulder, get my attention, and I'll get my message. But I'm not walking around working or reading people because we also have this human experience that we came to have, and that is to go have lunch with girlfriends and go get groceries and take the dog to the vet or whatever this human plan is that we have. And so for me, when I'm gonna go into a reading, I open up my energy. It's like, "All right, all channels on. Let's go. Let's see what we got here," right? And then when I'm done with my reading, I do it. I turn the volume down on it, and it's time to go be Michelle.
How do you do that?
So I actually will just have that visual where it's like I turn the volume down and I'm done.
Right? Right,
I
like on a radio dial.
Yeah, I don't make it very complicated. I feel like, spirit world, if I sit there and say it's gonna take 3 hours for spirits to charge my water with peace, they're like, "Okay, well, we'll wait 3 hours, that's cute." And if I grab my water, I'm like, "Peace." They're like, "Okay, done, good, we got it," you know? So, that's kind of how I work, and so I have that idea. I can turn it on and I can turn it off pretty quick like most mediums, but I think a lot of times people do think mediums are always walking around on, but that would be similar to someone who's a doctor trying to diagnose every person they come in contact with all day. Like you're like, "Oh, I think you have a liver problem. You have kidney issues. Oh my gosh, you need to get your ankle x-rayed," right? It's just not practical.
Yeah, and what fun is that? Walking into a crowd of people and, you're getting all this information. I'm the same way. I turn it on and off in a nanosecond. And I agree with you. I think people overcomplicate the crap out of this. It's not complicated. It's easy. Everybody can do it. You just turn it on and off in a nanosecond. It's
Right.
it's not a big deal. All right, last question. Why do we incarnate?
We actually do it from a place of love. We do it from a place of exploration and wanting to learn more. So, my understanding is when we are in this heavenly realm and everything is so perfect and amazing, it's like, let's pick your favorite vacation spot and go there for 200 years. And after 200 years, you're going to be like, is there a new restaurant? Is there a new movie playing? Can we find a new beach? What about a new place to live for a while? And so really what happens is our souls, we need contrast to learn because it's easier to learn with contrast than it is in that heavenly realm. So we choose to come here to have these experiences so that we can learn and grow. We will always, always evolve. Our souls never stop evolving.
I agree. I always say, when I mean, I haven't heard any spirit come out and say heaven's really boring, but they wanna have the experience and the exploration is what I've gotten as well, similar to you. My goodness, my girl, geez Louise, you are just extraordinary, and what a brave, just incredible person you are to have gone through all of this and still standing and still be able to function and help others in the middle of all of this, and also after having survived it. I just think you're remarkable in so many ways, and I've only been talking to you for an hour, and I'm just flabbergasted with everything you've been through, and and just how inspiring you are to me and to everybody that's going to watch and listen to this show. So thank you for your work and thank you for everything that you're sharing with humanity. My goodness. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, they can go to my website, michelleclare.net, and they'll see upcoming events and gallery readings in person and online, or be able to book an individual appointment. And so that's a great place to find me. And Julie, really, thank you so much for your kind words. And thank you so much for your work and what you bring to this collective consciousness and being the light that you are.
Oh, thanks for that. All righty, everybody. Boy, that's a lot for us to ponder and digest here, everything that we've just talked to Michelle about. So, in the meantime, sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama, mwah, and from Arizona, too, where Michelle is. We'll see you next time.
To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.